as you know.
So hi everyone, and welcome to this webinar regarding CX strategies for customer service, and especially from a telco perspective. The ones that will conduct this presentation today is me, Fredrik Lemming. I work as a sales director at Telia, and I will shortly introduce Telia, and also my colleague Jonas Fogelberg. So what we will talk about today is brief an introduction to the topics customer experience. So to understand why we're doing it, and also talk about Telia's and the leading CX strategies from customer service Nordic perspective, and we will go into details. So talking about Telia. So Telia company is the incumbent telco in the Nordics. So we are active in the Nordic and the Baltics. We have a head office in Stockholm, and we're roughly about 20,000 employees. So pretty much like Deutsche Telekom, but in the Nordics and the Baltics. Talking about the customer experience, we need to understand the evolution and where we're coming from. So we are coming from the traditional call center, and then evolution to what was a top priority a couple of years ago, omni-channel. And up until then, we have had an understanding and had an interaction focus. We have realized that customer wants to interact with us over different channels, and we have provided that in two fashions, either with multi-channel, meaning that we have different software, different applications for different channels. So from a customer perspective, they have the options to interact with you and us over different channels. And then a lot of companies saw the potential of going into omni-channel strategy, meaning that you have all channels in one platform, making it easier to deliver on customer expectations. Remember me, remember my history, and also boosting productivity. And we have seen gains in the ballpark figure of 25%. But the next step in the evolution is the AI-driven customer meeting. And this is fueled by the initiative to self-service more and more interactions. And we have always had that part of the strategy, but the shortage of technology today or yesterday didn't allow us to do very good self-service applications for more complex tasks. And suddenly, with the help of AI, we can do much more advanced self-service services with a good customer satisfaction and experience. But then it's very important to keep in mind that when we are deploying AI-driven self-service applications, we need to have a conversational focus. And I will shortly give you and illustrate what we mean by a conversational focus. I will also talk to you and explain what we mean by AI-driven customer meetings in terms of AI capabilities. But this is, of course, I mean, we forecast and project sort of the big growth in interactions. It will happen in digital channels, meaning that it's imperative to have good self-service. Otherwise, you will have an increasing load of manual interactions. And we believe that sort of the manual interactions, they will maintain in the same ballpark figures, will reduce a bit, but still in the future, people will continue, customers will continue to call, and they will send emails, they will chat with you. So in order to grasp the whole picture, you need to have a focus on conversational and interactions. You need to have a platform strategy that embraces these two dimensions. So what do we mean by a conversational focus? And I'm going to give you an illustration with this. This is a benchmark between two virtual assistants, and this is carried out in English, so we could benchmark in the same fashion. And the brand is not important, but the story is, and we're going to stress test them to the same story. So in this case, it starts with, what can I help you with? And my question is, do I need an umbrella tomorrow? And in Uppsala, where I live, in October, it looks kind of gloomy. So I'm asking the virtual assistant, what about in Miami? It presents sort of the weather in Miami and looks much nicer. So I decide that I want to go there. So I'm asking the virtual assistant, can you find me some cheap flight tickets there? And then it presents a couple of sites where they sell cheap flight tickets. So what did we see here? It understands umbrella equals rain, which is good, and it uses my position, makes it very relevant for me. Not talking about the weather in Germany or in Stockholm, in Uppsala, and understands that I'm talking about weather, but in Miami, so has some contextual understanding. And now we're going to jump into the same conversation, but for a different virtual assistant. And pretty much when we are asking the question, can you find me some cheap flight tickets there? And up to that point, they are both delivering on the same KPIs. So this is what it looks like. And now I'm asking the virtual assistant, can you find me some cheap flight tickets there? Here are some upcoming round trip flights. Flights from Stockholm to Miami, and presenting sort of with companies and prices. And did you have any dates in mind? And you can clearly see that there's a difference here. The later one is taking this dialogue one step further, making it a better customer experience. And then, of course, I'm not too sure if they are, promoting the best deals to Miami, but at least they are presenting something to me and proactively promotes available dates. And the difference here in experience has nothing to do with sort of the software or the hardware. This is pretty much top-notch for both of these companies. The difference here is, of course, the developers focus on conversational. And this is key in order to have a good customer experience. And I think this is a very good example that if you thinking and taking that sort of one step further, you will have a better experience and the usage will increase. So this is, of course, using artificial intelligence technology. But what about artificial technology for customer service? Well, it's not about self-driving cars. For us, it's about conversations, virtual assistants, bots across devices and channels. It's about knowledge. It's about retrieving knowledge from multiple unstructured sources, curated and non-curated data, and also accessing that using natural language in order to understand better what it's all about, like a Google approach. And it's about analytics, leverage deep learning to gain insights from customer interactions using the AI technology. But this is technology, and we need to put that into context to a strategy in order to support this AI-driven customer meeting. And this is Telia's strategy for customer experience. We want to keep customer online, we want to optimize contact center, and we want to remove root cause for interactions. And this is a common strategy implemented for the leading customer service companies in the Nordics. So what are the pain points here and what to address with AI? Well, the pain points for keep customer online, and I think you can recognize this, is that self-service and information is insufficient and hard to find. Hence, customer engage in a manual interaction. And from optimized contact center perspective, it takes time to train agents. Information and knowledge are not easily available, making it very hard to give a good answer straight away, leading to a lot of redialers unless you're a very experienced agent. And when it comes to remove root cause for interactions, we want to know what's going on. Everyone wants to know that, but we have the data and we are saturated with data, but we have no efficient way of gaining actionable insights. So during the rest of this presentation, we will dig into each of these strategies, and we will tell you how we are, with the help of AI, addressing these issues in order to get a better customer experience. And in order to do so, I will introduce my colleague, Jonas, and he will start talking about the knowledge side. I will talk about the conversation, and then he will run off with analytics, and we will jointly do the summary. So Jonas, over to you.
Thank you, Fredrik. So what do we mean by knowledge, or perhaps smart knowledge? Well, as Fredrik mentioned in this example, it needs to be aware of context and also present relevant answers, of course. So let me give you another example of this. If you're in a context where you're asking this question, a simple question like, how much is it? And you expect the knowledge base to understand and give you a relevant answer. That knowledge base must be aware of the context where the question is asked. So if you're, instance, in a barber shop asking this question, it can be that you're either asking for the price of a haircut, or how much does a hair product cost. And you can provide even more context by, for example, holding a shampoo bottle in your hand when asking this question. Right, then it's pretty obvious what the context is. So the knowledge base in this case could give you the right answer. Well, the problem with knowledge bases is they can seldom handle context very well. If you're, for example, visit a web page and try out their search function or FAQ function, you often get a long list of answers which seldom helps you. But if you instead have a smart knowledge search function, you will get much better results. And let me show you a real example of this. Back in 2016, we had a classic static FAQ regarding a certain product, and we had around 400 to 1,000 views in our static knowledge base each week, which you can see in this graph. That's the light blue colored bar. When people couldn't find the answer, they instead gave us a call, which is the purple bar here. But then we adapted using the smart knowledge base instead, and what happened? So these are the same product and the same questions, and here you can see a dramatic increase in the number of views. So and hence a lot less calls being needed to be handled. So this is an example of what you can do with, as Fredrik talked about, artificial intelligence, using this to match customer questions with answer and automatically adapting over time using several unsupervised training components like interpreting abbreviations. It has adaptive text analyzing with natural language processing, and also closed learning loop based on customer giving explicit or implicit feedback on whether that knowledge base helped them. And of course, there is also supervised training of this knowledge base using customer questions. So this is a good example of what context can really mean for a smart knowledge base. And moving on, this is a tool that our customer care uses and for handling calls, emails, and chats. And of course, they also have the same knowledge base at hand during chat conversation in this example. So they easily, which easily makes them be able to insert relevant answers or handle giving good answers during a phone call. Okay, so to summarize the knowledge part, please let me show you how our smart knowledge base ties into a sort of ecosystem feeding many channels and devices at the same time. The knowledge base represented here in the middle by a brain can not only serve the agents that we saw, it can also be used in chats and available in the self-service widgets on our website, as we saw in the smart FAQ example. But it can also be used in our chatbots, in our conversational IVR using natural language understanding, and in our messaging channels with our end customers. So this means that you can develop your knowledge base once and then deploy it in many different channels, instead of the traditional approach of creating separate knowledge bases for each channel, creating silos of different technical solutions. So this approach gives our customer care an edge and can really drive a good customer experience across channels. So to summarize, the knowledge aspect, before moving on, with the smart context-sensitive AI-based knowledge base, which can be used everywhere, is one of the vital keys for driving efficiency and customer satisfaction here at Telia's customer care. So Over to you, Fredrik, for the next chapter.
Yeah, and then a vital part of the knowledge base ecosystem is that since all channels are using the knowledge base and it's self-learning, everyone contributes to the training. So when the chatbots get smarter, then the agent's knowledge base gets smarter at the same time, meaning that the more you scream for help, the smarter the system gets, and that is vital for us. So talking about conversation, and I will also now introduce why this previous picture is so important for us. So conversations from our perspective is basically this approach. Hi, how can I help you today? An open question, regardless if it's voice or if it's text, and then it's up to the customer to really, either say with their own words what it's all about or typing in. It's like, Google. And this allows us to have a better understanding about the intent of the caller or the person, the customer that is texting in. And for us at Telia, at the customer service, we have different conversational bots. It's chatbots, the traditional one when you're texting. We have voice bots, and that is an area that we are exploring a bit about, and I will talk shortly about it. And then also we are having this conversation IVR, which is basically an IVR that is not based on touch tones. It's based on this open question, and customers are talking to the IVR, and it's not directed speech. It's entirely up to the customer to use his own words, and it's up to us to interpret it. And maybe, if for clarification reason, we need to do some following up questions. It could be used by talking or implementing digits and pressing buttons. But anyway, so what is the benefit of this? Well, of course, when you have a better understanding about the intent, then suddenly you can do much more things. Then you can suddenly starting to have a more delicate sort of routing strategies, or you could push and promote digital services. So one of the initiatives that we are doing at our own customer service operation is an initiative called Happy Hangups. And it's conversation IVR to chatbot. And this is how it works. So when a customer calls in, the first thing we do is we check if the customer is using a mobile phone. And then using the conversation IVR, we identify the intent. For example, if it's an invoice, and then we check if we have a good sort of self-service application for that specific sort of invoice inquiry. And if there's a queue situation, I think it's the queue situation is the target is queue longer than 5 minutes. Then we proactively offer the customer to engage with the self-service chatbot while waiting in line. So it doesn't lose their queue position, and they are not forced to use this. It's a proactive offer. And then we send an SMS, a text message out, and from that text message, it looks like this. Then they can start to engage with our chatbot. In this case, if the self-service applications that we are promoting is built into the chatbot. And then pretty much, then the conversation goes from the conversation IVR straight into the chatbot, and the chatbot really knows what this is all about. So this is one way of implementing the keep customer online strategy. And of course, the chatbot is very important and vital for us. And our chatbot's name is Charlie. And in the start, it was trained to handle invoices, domain invoices. And in the beginning, it handled roughly 10,000 in tasks per month. And the majority of the task was so-called do cases. And what is a do case? Well, we divide our user stories into 3 different categories. The do cases, and this is, I would say, the biggest potential for the AI-driven customer meeting. With the help of AI, the better understanding of what it's all about, then suddenly self-service applications can perform much more complex tasks in a very good way compared to what it used to be. And these are the things that we are referring to do cases, that you finish everything well inside the self-service application, the chatbot, not being transferred to a different service. And then how cases is more like answering how questions. How do I connect this, and how do I do this, and whatever. And then guide cases is a vital part of getting the bot up to speed. It might be so that we have very good self-service applications well hidden on our web page or in our systems. So instead of developing them and introducing them to the bot, which takes time, we can guide the customer to the site, the web page, where these self-service applications exist. And then the chatbot follows like a chaperone to the site where the customer is, and if there's any question, the customer can go back to the chatbot just to continue the conversation with the chatbot, meaning that you are never leaving the customer alone and kind of losing track of what has happened. So today we have trained Charlie, and now Charlie resides on a landing page, and this is a much bigger commitment. So now it handles 100,000 tasks per month, and it offloads customer service at approximately 4%. So of course this requires a lot of training, and we will talk about training. And then in the future we have the strategy to offload customer service with 10%. So this is Chatbot Charlie. And now talking about how we could benefit from developing Chatbot Charlie and tie that into this ecosystem with the smart knowledge base. So if we have developed Chatbot Charlie with our conversation engine, feeding it with knowledge from our smart knowledge base, and then putting on Google Cloud, suddenly what we could access within the Google Cloud concept is that we could deploy a chatbot user story in the smart speakers like Google Home or Alexa in the future. Meaning that when we're changing the user story in the smart knowledge base, then the user story will change for the chatbot as well in Google Cloud. So developing once or many channels at the same time, securing that you have good content. I think I'm going to give you an example of agile chatbot development at our premises. It's Sunday night, an e-invoice was sent out to customer and they couldn't open it due to wrong due date. So what happened is that in the Monday morning, we realized that and we developed 2 new user stories that was published in the chatbot. And then the chatbot usage exploded. It was all-time high the rest of the day, meaning that customers are inclined to visit our web page to look for answers. And 60% of all chatbot interactions were the new user stories with a CSAT of 93%. And if Chatbot Charlie wouldn't have been easy to train, then we would have required an additional 60 agents to just match the workload and to maintain our service levels. So once again, and a vital part of this, when you're implementing AI, it needs to be easy to manage and needs to be owned by the operation. Now I will hand over to you, Jonas, talking about analytics.
Thanks. The final area, and perhaps the most important. Everyone is doing analytics, but how is it applied in your business? I will tell you how we are applying analytics in our customer care just briefly. And this is the question that our managers is constantly asking us. And it's traditionally hard to answer that right away, since it often requires a lot of research. But a couple of years ago, we got the possibility with the new tool to analyze all of our interactions. Previously, we had could look at less than 1% of all interactions. And this slide is trying to tell you, you want to look at the poor interactions and the excellent interactions. And our analytics tools allow us to do just that. Let's look at some quick examples of what we can do with the analytics tool, and especially with our chatbot Charlie at Telia. So this is a screen dump from the analytics tools, and in this case we are handed the top 10 questions asked and therefore suited for being provided by the chatbot instead. So this is a very simple and effective way of us to use the analytics tool. Another example is how we can easily try different hypotheses, like, is a customer irritated if it's being moved from chatbot Charlie over to an agent for some reason when the Charlie cannot handle the question. So here we also have some screened up. What happens? We wanted to analyze this. We had an idea that perhaps the customer would get very irritated and give us a poor customer feedback. But the fact was actually we learned that no, they weren't angry. So that's a good insight to know with the new analytics tools. And due to time constraints, I will not cover this example, but you will have it anyway. As Fredrik told you, we can gain a lot of insights using the interaction analytics tool. So, Fredrik, it's time to summarize what we've talked about today.
Yes, and it's this is remember sort of the strategy: keep customer online and optimize contact center and remove root cause for interactions, and everything is targeted against sort of customer experience. And how do AI and how do we work with this? Well, basically conversations that we have been talking about, you know, it's all about keeping customer online, as we showed, and using the analytics tool that we showed to identify different user stories and why our customer interacting with us is used for this pillar. And then, of course, knowledge about to optimize contact center. But all these areas are interconnected with each other because conversation feeds analytics, as we saw, and analytics feeds the knowledge base, identify gaps, and knowledge feeds conversation. So it's a closed loop, and it all blends in perfectly, and you need to work with all these three domains together. So keeping this AI in mind, but at the end of the day, I think we should listen to this guy, Steve Jobs. I think he did something that was very clever, and I did many clever things. But one thing he said is you have to start with the customer experience and work backwards to the technology and not the other way around. And I think that marks a good end to this presentation. Or do you have anything that you would like to address as well, Jonas?
No, thank you very much for listening.
Yes, thank you. So I'm very impressed